Thank you, everybody. My name is Terry. I'm alcoholic, and it's a pleasure to be here. I think. Oh man, got so emotional listening to Amy. I have been, for 10 years, we've shared April as our birthday month, and I've got to watch her go through a lot of changes. And I love her very much. She's an amazing woman. I guess that's one of the things we get here. We stay around a long time. We develop attachments that we were incapable of ever having. But how did it start for me? Well, I was the oldest son in a military family, and as an eldest son, I was nicknamed Biff, which seemed to be, those of you who are familiar with the great Santini, you would get that reference. There's nobody here that's that old. Anyway, well, maybe there is. I was raised in a family that was not ruled by God. It was ruled by Chief Petty Officer Hubert Brainard, with the authority that was handed down to him from the Chief of Naval Operations. And my mother was an alcoholic and a rageaholic. And guess what? I grew up to be an alcoholic and a rageaholic. I graduated from, I won't go into my earlier escapades. If it wasn't for band, I probably wouldn't have survived high school. I wouldn't have survived middle school or high school if I hadn't been in band and taken up an instrument and become a musician. I graduated from high school in 1962, and I launched into the 60s. The 60s was my thing. I enjoyed it very thoroughly. I did everything that I could, everything that I thought I could get away with. It didn't matter that I was married by the time and had a kid when I was 19. None of that stuff slowed me down. I enjoyed the 60s very much. I sailed the sea of the 60s, fueled by a potent mixture of alcohol, pot, and LSD. I saw some weird shit in the 60s. And some of it might have actually happened. You never know. There's a lot of things came down. We did a lot of stuff. I lived in the Bay Area several times. Both of my older kids were born in the Bay Area. In 1968, we were living there. And I won't go into what we were doing because that would take way too much time. But let's just say the world was our oyster. We really thought we had it together. And we thought that we were on the cutting edge of society and we were going to change shit. We were going to stop this war, and we were going to change society through the example of our lives. It was a nice fantasy, and it kept us busy. In 1968, my wife Audrey she went into labor. We were living in Mill Valley, and I was working in the Haight-Ashbury every day. And Audrey went into labor and we jumped in one of the family cars because there was about 10 or 15 people living in that house. We jumped into one of the family cars, and my friend John Mazer was driving, and I got in the back seat with Audrey, and I kneeled in the wheel well and laid her out on the seat because she was starting to go into hard labor. And we took off into San Francisco, towards the University of California Moffitt Hospital on Parnassus, which was right above the Haydock. And we were in a 1957 two-tone Ford station wagon with a zigzag man silk-screened on the door panels. We were cool. And but we didn't get to the hospital. Mid-spanning the bridge, my daughter was born, and I picked her up and wrapped her in my shirt, took my shirt off, wrapped her. Audrey sat up, and I handed her this beautiful baby, and she was crying, my dear, lovely Golden. We were right in the middle of the Golden Gate Bridge when she was born. And that's what's on her birth certificate. It turns out it was the first baby ever born on the Golden Gate Bridge, and they made kind of a big deal about it. I named her Golden. But there was a moment there. I had something a little bit like Bill Wilson's Cathedral moment. And when I handed Golden to Audrey, and I looked out, a beautiful sunshiny day in San Francisco Bay, the fog had lifted, and I heard this voice that said, "Pay attention. This is important." But I drank for another 10 years after that, and used pot and LSD on and on through all that time. I'm going to skip over a bunch of weird shit. It's all very entertaining, but I don't even like talking about it that much when I speak. Some of it was, we get up to such shenanigans when we think we got our shit together and we're drunk. Anyway, I was trying to get my act together. We were living in Bellingham by then. I had moved to Bellingham as a psychedelic refugee in 1968 after Golden was born. And we were living up there. And I was trying to get my act together. I was going to school. I had a decent job. I just couldn't shake this. I'd quit taking LSD, psychedelics pretty much, or occasional mushroom. That's sort of like putting dressing on your salad. I was trying to get my act together, but this alcohol thing was just kept undermining me. I was having trouble at school and at work, and this stuff just kept coming and coming. So I finally stopped drinking for 30 days. And not 30 days, 90 days, 3 months. And a friend of mine was getting married in Tillamook, Oregon. And he'd asked me to come entertain at the wedding party. It was all of the noted hippoisie of the Northwest, I won't go into it, but, that kind of thing. And I went down there, and I had a couple of beers on Friday night while I was entertaining at this party. And then the next day, I started drinking in the morning, and I blacked out. Oh, I should say I took my daughter Golden with me. She was about 10 and a half, something like that. I took her with me, and I blacked out by 5 o'clock. I didn't even know what happened. The next day I woke up, and I looked around for somebody had taken care of her for me. And, I went around and I found a beer in the refrigerator on the back porch. Sat down and opened it up. And I took a couple of swigs off of it. And I looked down at this bottle of Budweiser. And I realized that what had happened, I had lost track of my daughter, with whom I was supposed to be responsible for. And I knew that that was going to keep happening. Those kinds of things were going to keep happening to me as long as I kept drinking. And I had that epiphany, a moment of clarity. And it reminded me of when she was born. And I threw that beer bottle as far as I could without even finishing it. And I didn't drink again after that. But I resisted getting any help. I resisted going to Alcoholics Anonymous. And of course, I was restless, irritable, and discontented, as only an untreated alcoholic can be. I was not easy to get along with. Although I never found it necessary to take another drink, I did from time to time find it necessary to behave like an asshole. And that was something that was starting to cause me problems. I medicated myself with pot, smoking pot. And I don't know, I know that there's people that get relief from that. I get it. I understand that. But for this alcoholic, I was just putting off the day of reckoning. When I was going to run out of reasons to keep living. And that's what happened. A couple of years later, I was at work, and this guy came to see me. And I had worked for this guy about 8 years before that. I attended bar for him before I went back to school. And by this time, I'm working at the Whatcom Community College. I'm working in a financial aid office and the academic advisor. And he came to see me about something that had to do with, he wanted to do with the school. But after he was done doing his business with me, he told me his story, that he was sober. He was 2 years sober. And he had gone to Alcoholics Anonymous, and his life had changed. And he thought maybe I might be interested. And I knew why he thought I might be interested, because I'd been a bartender for him for a couple of years, and he'd found it necessary to fire me for drinking on the job. And later I asked him, but everybody drank on the job, why did you fire me? And he said something very interesting. He said, Terry, when you drank, you would turn mean, and we couldn't have that. And I understood what he meant. So I listened to him, but I still didn't want to go to AA. I don't know what my resistance to it was, and I didn't want to stop smoking pot. That was probably the reason why. So I put him off, and he'd contact me every month or so, just stick a fork in me to see if I was done, that old thing. God bless the old style AA, where they would go out and try to find somebody to get sober. That's what he was doing. Eventually, events came to pass, he caught me in a moment when I knew my back was against the wall. The wolves were leaping at my flanks, tearing off bits of flesh. Could no longer make any more excuses. My ex-wife told me, by this time we were exes, she told me that even though I wasn't drinking, I was still an asshole. I didn't like that information. And I knew if anybody knew, she did. And so he called one day, and maybe it was going to be the last time he called me. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. Anyway, he called me, and he said, there's a noon meeting I'm going to. You want to meet me there? And I said, yeah, I think I will. Because I was starting to get suicidal. The pot wasn't working anymore. I was running out of reasons to keep moving. I'd run out of moves altogether. Had no more game, as they say nowadays. So I went with him to a meeting. And he was pretty excited. And I could tell I was making him happy. And he took me to my first 10 meetings, actually. He picked me up at my front door. And he took me around, and he introduced me to all the people in Bellingham. I met a lot of people there. He took me to see Claudette, who was the Mother Superior of, the Bellingham group, which was affectionately known as the Pit. And she took one look at me and said, if you're still smoking pot, you're stupid. And I got it. I understood what she meant. And I didn't smoke any pot again after that. And that's my sobriety day. I have no idea if it was really April 14th. By the time I realized I had to have a date, it takes a while for the fog to lift. You know what I mean? Could have been one of those days. But it was about the middle of April. Some interesting things happened after that. But the most important thing is I became a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. This guy's name was Chris E. And the tavern that I worked at was the old Fairhaven Tavern in the south side of Bellingham. And those were the old days. So I started coming to Alcoholics Anonymous. Chris became my first sponsor. I went through the steps. I did as good a job as I was capable of doing at the time. There was an unwillingness on my part to be completely honest about what I needed to do. I'm really fortunate that I stayed sober as long as I did. I'm one of those alcoholics that really require, in order for comfortable sobriety, my life really requires a spiritual awakening. And the kind of spiritual awakening that changes you from the bottom up. And that was a hard thing for me to do. I still continue to have problems with my relationships and with at work. I had my charming moments. I'm a decent dancer. I can sing and dance, as Bob Dylan says. I was a song and dance man. But inside, I needed more than just going to meetings and doing the steps. I know we say that that's all you need to do, but something has to change. Something inside me had to change. Something serious. And a couple things happened. At about 15 years sober, I'd gone through a breakup of another relationship and job change. I was just kind of at loose ends. I was going to meetings, but, I met a guy by the name of John Weeks. And he cornered me after a meeting one day, and he got me in a bear hug, and he said, Terry, God loves you, and so do I. And he held on to me long enough that I relaxed a little. And so I started going to the meetings that he went to. And I started watching this guy. How does he get the fire coming out of his eyes like that? What is he doing? God, every time there's a newcomer that comes into the meeting, he gets his phone and he calls them every day. What is this guy doing? So I followed him around for a while. I saw how he lived, and I saw how he treated people. And he took me to visit his family up in Canada, and I got to see how he treated even people that didn't like him, like one of his ex-wives. I saw how he treated her with respect and with love, not with resentments. And I thought, wow, could I possibly live like that? And that started me on a new journey in AA. A new way of living. Like Johnny H. says, you can do the steps. You can get a sponsor. You can go to a meeting every day. But if you don't cross over from being a taker to being a giver, you will have missed what's really here. There's a lot of joy. There's a lot of satisfaction in being part of the solution rather than being part of the problem. I was really fortunate that I stayed sober long enough. I stayed here long enough where it could start to happen for me. And I found that when I started to look around, John Weeks wasn't the only guy like that. And he wasn't the only woman like that in AA. They were all over the place. These were the people that were, making sure that newcomers didn't leave the room without a phone number and without a good word. These were people that made sure the meeting opened up on time and the coffee was made. And they had something going on in their lives. They have the love light coming out of their eyes. And you can see it if you look. You're not too afraid. And so I decided I wanted some of that. I wanted to be more like that. And so that has been the rest of my journey, is to try to be more like that. And I've had varying degrees of success. I've stayed sober. You know what they say, you get sober this long, you don't drink and you don't die. The years just pile up. I want to thank all of you for listening to me. I know a lot of you. I have a lot of good friends here. People that I've sponsored. People that have held out their hand to me and helped me through rough times. And I owe you guys. I owe all of you. I want to read something, and then I'm going to knock this thing off. Yes, there is a substitute, and it is vastly more than that. It is a fellowship in Alcoholics Anonymous. There you will find release from care, boredom, and worry. I had to turn off the air conditioner. It makes too much noise. Your imagination will be fired. Life will mean something at last. The most satisfactory years of your existence lie ahead. Thus we find the fellowship. And so will you. And every time I would sit down at a meeting next to John Weeks, he would rub his shoulder against me like this and say, "Shoulder to shoulder, Brainard, we commence shoulder to shoulder our common journey. Then you will know what it means to give of yourself that others may survive and rediscover life. You will learn the full meaning of love thy neighbor as thyself." Page 152 and 153 of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you all very much. And I love all of you guys. I particularly love the weird ones. You're my favorites. And it looks like we got a hell of a lot of them here tonight. And the weirdest one of all, I'm with you, dude. I'm with you. Thank you.